Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 5 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about narrowing the gap between strategy and execution and how leaders can be more successful in measuring and improving their team's results. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Alex Castro, best-selling author, creator and founder of ReM Score and CEO of M Corp. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's really a great opportunity to share this moment with you.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this with you. Definitely top of mind for me and my work as well. So why don't we start by you giving a little background on yourself as well as what you're currently doing?
Yeah. Most of my career has been spent in the startup small business world, growth of 0 to, $50, $100 million kind of space. And one of the things that's evolved over the last few years is, really recognizing that the innovation engine, the idea engine, the strategy engine is working really well. And what's happening is that a lot of those opportunities and a lot of that potential within people and companies is really falling off when it has to come to the doing of the idea and getting it to market, right? A lot of marketers and a lot of product developers and businesses in general never get the customer or the market to test out the idea because they can't execute it, and that's the thing that we're trying to resolve for the market.
Great. So let's dive right in then. So
yeah.
And that's really our main topic, is this idea of narrowing the gap between strategy and execution, or execution or the doing part of the strategy, so companies can achieve greater success. And you talked about this a little bit already, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, what does this gap between, there's a lot of great, really smart leaders out there with great strategic direction, but to what you were saying earlier, there's a gap between that and actually getting the work done. And it's not even for lack of having great teams to support it. But, what exactly does this gap look like?
Well, really what I see happening in the marketplace is that there is such attention to detail in the validation of an idea or a strategy.
Yeah.
And so, a leadership team may say, hey, look, we need to go into this direction. We need to grow this much. We need to move into these markets or whatever that fundamental is. And then the next tier down within the organization, or even that group, depending on the scale of the business, is then putting that vision into action, into motion. And so ideas start to pop up. How are we going to get there? How are we going to expand, sales, grow revenue, grow customer base, so on and so forth. And where there is a lot of very mature thinking and really mature approaches is in that analysis of the validity. Like, do we really want to invest in this direction? Is that where we're going to put our dollars? And there is so much attention to that. Then what happens is that the consumption of time in doing that, then it gets fundamentally tossed over the wall to an execution team, and leaders or the sponsors of that idea sit back and say, okay, well, let's get going, get moving. We've already analyzed. We spent a lot of time analyzing this. Now we got to get it done. We got to get it done. We got to get it done.
Yeah.
And more often than not, 70 to 80% of strategic initiatives, this is where they fall to the wayside. This is where the market never gets to validate whether or not the strategy was actually fundamentally sound. And this is where I see that companies in general and professionals as well, this is where potential goes to die, right? Is that at that 70 to 80% watershed of those things, there isn't a lot of, follow through or carry through, because the doing part of the idea is suddenly epically, harder than anticipated, or, really what we see, fundamentally at the root cause is that there isn't good alignment within the business to actually execute the idea. And the alignment is not hard to reach. It's not hard to get there. And you have to pay attention to it and measure it in a way that removes all of that cognitive bias that we all have that says, no, it's not a big deal. We'll take care of it during the process. And that's just not the case.
Yeah. And when you say it like that, and I've certainly experienced this as well, it seems pretty straightforward to your point of, there should be some relatively straightforward steps to take. And yet, what you're talking about with the gaps here, I've seen, there's stats on, for instance, like digital transformation projects have a 70% failure rate or something like that, or at least 70% fail to achieve their primary goals. And why is this, if everybody knows about it and everybody's talking about it, and everything from Harvard Business Review to us here on this podcast, everybody's talking about, why is it so pervasive? And what are leaders and teams doing that is making it worse?
Well, it's a great question, and it's probably the single point of greatest frustration for myself in the whole process in communicating this, is that, as I shared, we go through this very elaborate and very well thought through analysis process to determine whether that's the direction we want to invest in.
Yeah.
And because it's time consuming, there's a couple of different things, right? So number one, that process is time consuming. Right? Yeah. Number two, the market has compressed. So, I've talked to S&P 100 leaders who are saying, before I had 18 months to roll out a new product or a new iteration of a product, and now I've got, 5 or 6 if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
And that time compression, suddenly you're spending a lot of time in that initial analysis and saying and validating, is this the right place to spend the money? And then when it gets to the next stage, people are like, look, you just got to go, because the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. And so there's two things that happen. One, from a leadership side, largely they're saying, okay, great. Now, we've gone through this whole process, and in their heads, they've done a lot of work.
Right.
And so now they hand it over to the team, and they're like, okay, well, where are we on the progress on this? Where are we on the progress? And the team is, in this initiative to the team, is now brand new, relatively speaking, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, look, we're trying to get our bearings here. We're trying to figure out where we're going. And from the team side, from somebody who gets handed this opportunity, what it represents for them is a career opportunity. It's something that's going to potentially benefit their how they see their career moving forward. And so there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear, and say, look, we cannot slow down. We don't have time to do this. We don't have time to do this analysis or understand. We're just going to have to deal with it as we go. And that is really the pivotal moment where you are relying on a execution path of hope.
Yeah.
Because you're leaving it up to chance. And Fundamentally, no business is perfectly aligned to execute the new strategic initiative 80, 90% of the time. There's too much swirl. And what's worse is that there is no recovery time. If you are off track, it's like running a cross country race, right? If you go off and you take the wrong path on a cross country race, there is no time to recover. You're done. That's it. Your race is over. And that is what's holding that progress back. That is what's limiting the potential of ideas today. It's not the fact that the ideas aren't good enough. It's that the execution team does not have enough information to make good data-driven decisions on what they have to do or correct in alignment in that execution process. And that is where the potential is just washing away.
So let's talk about the measurement and the role of data in all of this. So how do we? So the scenario, the leader knows things aren't working, the team knows things aren't working. How are these kinds of things measured? I mean, if the initiative were launched, we could see if it was successful or not. But I guess what we're talking about here is we can't even get it to launch because we kind of can't get out of our own way to get it launched. So how do you think about measurement and data in this, in these early stages of trying to move something forward?
Yeah. Well, there's this old adage, right? It's just sometimes you got to go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
Right. And what really needs to be understood is that fundamentally, at a leadership level or as an execution leader level, you may be a product manager or a marketing product manager. And your business is not in alignment to execute the idea that's in front of you right now. It's not there. Right. And this is where then ego, the sort of the cognitive bias of ego kicks in, right? And says, no, we're perfect, right? No, we can do this, And I hate to tell you that SEAL Team 6 isn't going to drop out of a helicopter and remove all the obstacles for you. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And where I think that time can be invested is really understanding is where is the alignment problem? For us, I developed initially a method about 10 years ago. This, what I focus on right now started about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the company's about 20 years old, but we were doing a lot of, digital transformation work. And more we saw clients bringing us in who were just not positioned to be successful at all. Like they basically say, okay, well, we need to transform this part of the business. Let's bring in some consultants. Let's bring in some people to help us out on this. All right, we're here. We're going to do this transformation work. And you really start to look around and it's like, yeah, like there is no alignment here. Right?
Yeah.
So, I'll give you an example that, we had a customer that we went, kind of ran our initial assessment on. And they have two primary areas, right, that they were struggling on. One was the fact that there wasn't cultural alignment to the strategy, right? So as an example, we measure 14 different areas of impact. Only 2 of them are technological, right? Yeah. Technology is not the root cause reason why things don't work. That maybe have been true 25 years ago, but it is not true.
Agreed, yeah.
At all. And so IT has nothing to do with it. Your technologists have nothing to do with it. That thinking has to get let go. That's a fundamental bias that just doesn't work. That's just a misunderstanding. And so what we were looking at is saying, look, where are you positionally? And if you look at alignment, like in the sense of alignment to, market demand, alignment to strategy of this idea, this initiative, or, alignment to the culture, one of the things that came out is that the alignment to culture was off, right? So what was being fundamentally told is that the participants in this initiative were feeling like at the end of this initiative, we're going to, in essence, violate our operating culture in this transformation project. We're not going to be the same as we were. And what that then cascaded into is that you have business units that are 100% of capacity in terms of their utilization of their staff. And that meant that they were going to have to let go of staff to work on this initiative for, let's say, 18 months, right? Let's say best case a year. And there was going to be fundamental resistance in that because they didn't want the culture to change. They didn't want the work environment to change. And where that also stemmed off, into was the fact that, decision making wasn't in the best position. It was a very slow decision model where in a transformation project, you need very rapid decision making to happen. They didn't understand their work process as well. And as well as that, they were making decisions based on the fact of what was the existing skill set within the
Yeah.
business technically.
Yeah.
And so when they were looking at alternatives and options, they were looking at it and saying, okay, well, we have this skill set within the business. It knows these types of tech and this kind of deployment approach.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but you're passing over actually the right answer,
Right.
because your bias is telling you, it's like, well, I know this tech. And so we're just going to do that because I know that. And that's the easiest thing to acquire is skill in association to some fundamental technology. Right? And so when you start to really dig at it, there are these fundamental root causes that happen, and they're embedded in your business. And the thing that I've stressed, just kind of a tangential a little bit.
Yeah.
I have 2 daughters, and they're in their 20s now. And when they were little, when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, what I would share with them over and over and over again is that every answer you need is around you. You just have to just look for it. It's all right there. It's not some big magical moment, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you lose your keys in your house and you're frantically looking to try to get out the door. It's like, where are my keys? Where are my keys? Where are my keys? Right? And you spend 10 minutes and you turn the corner and you see them on the corner of this tabletop, and you've looked at that table 10 times, rushing through the house.
Yeah.
And you're like, how did they get there? Right? And people say, well, some elf, took them and then put them back.
Right.
And the reality is it was always there. And the answers that most companies need to make the best decisions is in the company right now.
Yeah.
You have to just harvest the information and connect the dots. And that's the thing that I focus on. It's like, it's all right there. Like, you don't need some magical analysis from, some big, analysis shop to look at the market. I mean, maybe you'll find out some additional information but the reality is you have the data you need. Now, how do you align it to create insight, to understand what your capacity is? So that's the thing that I tend to, really advocate for, is that take the moment to understand what is your data telling you, and then don't dismiss it because you have this bias that you just want to go. It's like,
right.
right.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're like many marketing leaders today, you're inundated with a need to improve the customer experience across an increasing number of channels and touch points, all while ensuring your team is performing well, innovating, and continuously improving. So how do you find the time to determine what's next for you, your team, your brand, and your customers? My company, GK5A, can help. Whether it is advisory services, evaluation of marketing technology platforms and solutions, or digital agencies and implementation partners, or assistance with creating strategic roadmaps and prioritization of efforts, we've done it all and served as an ally to Fortune 1000 brands in industries like financial services, healthcare, consumer electronics, professional services, and more. You can learn more about these services and contact us at www.gk5a. That's www.gk5a.com. Now let's get back to the show. Speaking of the bias, is that definitely exists on the tactical level? You mentioned, okay, we know this platform or this technology or stuff like that, but what about even at the strategic level? I mean, I think there's bias. Obviously, there's like 100 some cognitive biases, so that it's got to be one of them. So it's I thought of this idea and I think I'm pretty smart, and so it must be. In other words, what happens when the premise is wrong? It's like I think it's bad enough when your interpretation of a strategy may be off, right? But what about the entire premise? Like, what do you do as a leader when to really determine, like, are we even facing the right direction at this point?
Again, I go back to, my previous statement just a few moments ago is that data's inside your company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you really just have to open your eyes to it. It's all right there in front of you. And it's, again, it goes to ego, right? In the
Yeah.
sense that, a lot of us have these ideas, right? We've all sat with that friend or colleague at a coffee, at a cocktail party, at a game, whatever the venue is. And it's like, I've got this amazing idea, right? Like,
Right.
what if, right? And when I get in that conversation, there was this movie in the '80s with Henry Winkler called Night Shift, and at one point there was one of the characters in it says, he used to walk around with a tape recorder, right? And he would one of it, and had all these ideas. He just had ideas all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the things he says is that amazing idea: feed tuna mayo. So you would have immediate, right, tuna sandwiches. And, and so we've all had that moment where we're
Yeah.
sitting there and somebody's got that great idea. Where's the data? Like, what are you basing this on? Right?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
gut instinct? And sometimes, people say, well, my gut's telling me. Well, A, that's a bias, number
Right.
one.
Right.
B, that's okay. There's some practiced element of you that as a professional knows or can kind of get an inkling to a direction, but go back it up with the data, because the data is going to tell you the reality of it, not, in the sense of what's my TAM, what's my SAM,
Yeah.
what am I
Yeah.
looking at in terms of how long is it going to take me? This may be a brilliant idea, but my development cycle is going to take me like 3.5 years to get it to market. And by then, there's 7 iterations of change in consumer demand. So,
Yeah.
look at the data, really understand. And sometimes you're just going to have to put that ego aside and that drive and that want. And you're just going to have to put it on a shelf and say, oh, it would have been so cool if we could have done it. But the reality is, if you had gone down that road, it would have just been totally
Yeah.
unsuccessful. And do you want to take the hit professionally? Do you
Right.
want to take the hit as a company?
Yeah. 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 Is that the hill you're going to die on, or whatever?
Yeah.
To use a terrible, analogy, but yeah.
Very
So
much.
what about changes over time? I mean, I've definitely worked with a lot of organizations on, agile type processes and things like that. And, I'm also not what I would call dogmatically agile in that, I think there's lots of ways to make things work, not just one. But how do you approach the fact that obviously things are constantly changing, but we can't pivot every day, or else then, we're going to not only drive our employees crazy, but our customers and all of that. But how do you think about change over time and addressing those, even if you have the right strategy and even if the numbers seem to be pointing in the right direction? Like, what are your thoughts on just iteration and making sure that you are course correcting?
Yeah, great question. The fundamental that I think that most people are still adjusting to is that you are not you are in a perpetual state of transformation.
Yeah.
And the days where, okay, I'm gonna, I don't know, pick something simple. I'm gonna set up a CRM, and I'm gonna connect that CRM to my website, and we're gonna, produce all this content, and then we're gonna run lead gen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that was great for a moment in time, and that moment in time is gone.
Yeah.
And so now what are you going to do to pivot? And to your point, you can't be continuously pivoting, because the thing that we're seeing really in the marketplace quite a bit, right, is that employees are struggling to engage with the purpose of the company.
Yeah.
And the reason that that's happening is that either the purpose is so sunk into dogmatic thinking, or it's changing so constantly. Professionals want, human beings want accomplishment. They want to see something through. And if you keep putting them into positions where either they are failing all the time or never completing all the time, after 2, 3, 4 efforts of that, they just start to get apathetic around it. And then they start to connect back to, it's like, I'm not getting anywhere. So there is that cost to your team, to your company, because there sometimes management gets a little blind. It's like, well, I'm just going to keep telling the troops we're going to go here now, and then we're going to go here now, and your folks are going to be like, yeah, I've heard this before, I'm disconnecting, I'm just going to go back to what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so that's a fundamental challenge, fundamental problem in the process to begin with. And so on the pivoting side, you have to more look at it as leapfrogging, right? So how many people or how many iterations do you want to leapfrog over? And the more you delay on the iteration, right, to the agile point, then it gets riskier and it gets harder, right? So it's like if you think of leapfrogging over a friend, right? Okay, one is good, two tough, three, holy
Right.
smokes, how are you going to do that, right? So it's really balancing that out, and then also taking a look at it and saying, look, are we at end of life on a product or a market or an offering? Because we just can't, the leapfrog or the work to catch up to the market pivot is so substantial that the timing just doesn't work anymore. And the cost and the sunken cost in that is no longer viable. And so if I took that same time and money and I put it into something else, what could I do there? And so that's, again, it goes back to the data, right? Just to kind of throw in another kind of concept is that, when you talk about social media applications, there's always just this constant commentary on social media today. And the challenge that presents is that people look at it for the face of it, right? In the sense that it's like, I'm unique, I'm putting myself out there,
Right.
I'm doing my thing and I'm talking about my truth and, whatever that may be. Those platforms are designed for one reason and one reason only. They are data collectors.
Yeah.
They are data collectors on your behavior in real time that then is turned around and provided to companies that buy it to tune in their marketing to sell you products, either on that same platform or through some other avenue.
Yeah.
And, the listener may be going, oh my gosh, that's such a violation. It's like, no, this is just the world we live in. Right?
Right.
I mean, people have been measuring this stuff for 1,000 years. I mean, everybody pays attention to behavior.
Yeah.
And behavior is really what dictates a lot of marketing and a lot of product development, right? It's like, why are you going to produce something nobody wants to buy?
And we have a lot of marketers listening to the show, so they're used to this stuff. So yeah.
And I'm always amazed at I hate to say it this way, but I'm always amazed at the level of naivete around what those things are.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Right? It's like, yeah, it's entertaining. And you're sharing a lot of your behavioral stuff, right? And so then I'm going to push it into the next space. This is where we're kind of moving into, is what happens in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the thing is that a lot of our data is out of our control. We do not own it on an active basis. Now, what happens when you push it into a metaverse where you're in a augmented reality situation or virtual reality situation? How do you know that the person you're doing business with, having a therapy appointment with, is who they are?
Right.
Right. And what are they doing with your personal health information, and what are they doing with your financial information? So, again, it's I think that we really, going back to the central theme, is that you have to really look at the data. The data is going to give you the insight, a little bit more grounding. It's not the oracle of truth. It is simply the grounding that gives you a better position to what strategy to pick, which is your original question, right? What direction do I go in? You have to look at the information that's telling you this is what people are buying, or this is where they want to go, or this is how they want to interact. And you have to make those decisions based on that, not momentary ideas in a coffee shop, or what your gut is telling you.
Yeah. Well, one last question before we wrap up here. You've given a lot of great advice already, but what's one piece of advice for, let's say, for that leader that they know there's a gap between strategy and execution, not sure where to start? What do you recommend?
What I really recommend is take the in our case, we developed a machine learning model that in essence takes what consultants used to do in, 1 to 2 months and does it in 5 days. Right. So we compressed the timeline so you could get insight to action much quicker in terms of what corrective process you want to do. Take that time, use our product. Great. If you don't want to, you just want to do it internally, develop your own thing, but take the time to understand, is your organization optimally aligned to deliver on the idea, or are you just going to be pushing, a ham sandwich through a straw?
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's the future of your company, number one, from a revenue side, but it's also from the perception side of how are others going to perceive the ability of your company to keep up, right? And number two, it's your career, to be very blunt about it. There is a pile of professional bodies somewhere of people who have tried and not, and they get kind of discarded, and then Pez dispenser opens up and it says, okay, what do you got?
Yeah. Nice. Great. Well, Alex, thanks so much for joining the show. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
I publish a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, Continuum. My book, Measure, Execute, Win, is on Amazon and Audible and other booksellers if you're interested in a book. But LinkedIn is typically the best way to kind of see what's what and what I'm up to. And look for some really cool stuff coming out in 23, because we're really going to be pushing that sort of metaverse data message quite a bit.
Great. Well, again, I'd like to thank Alex Castro, best-selling author, creator and founder of ReM Score, and CEO of M Corp, for joining the show. Talk with you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.